Hi, greetings. It's me, Dr. Paul Gerhardt, and this is the fourth video in my marketing series of videos. So if you haven't watched the other videos, you might want to think about going back and watching the other videos to kind of give you a foundation. But today's video is on marketing ethics. So there's a few things that I want to talk about in this video just to kind of lay down a foundation. We probably all have heard the words ethics, but what does it mean as it relates to companies and doing marketing? People really need to be aware of what their own ethical values are and what should the ethical values be for people who are doing marketing. In business, we talk a lot about social responsibility and where do the lines cross with ethical behavior and social responsibility as it relates to businesses. There are essentially four main steps in ethical decision making. We're going to talk about that. And how can you integrate ethics into your firm's marketing strategy? So let's get started. One thing that every organization really must consider is about consumer privacy. Very often there's information being shared from consumer to the company itself, like even if it's just a phone number. You know, what kind of responsibilities are out there and what are the laws? These are things that your company should investigate and consider. Having conversations with your colleagues. Do we share information or do we keep information private? What are the advantages and disadvantages? So many organizations have goals and it really is related to profit seeking. And if they are not being, decision makers are not being ethical, there obviously could be serious long-term consequences. So I like to think about playing chess. If I do this, then this will happen. And if I do this, this will happen. So you got to kind of think in big terms when you're in business because you want to have a successful business over the long run. And if people get hurt, it's because leaders in organizations have made unethical decisions. Ultimately, things need to be win-win. I love the term think win-win. It's popularized by Dr. Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it really, in all decision making, as far as I'm concerned, you really should be thinking about what is the win for us and what is the win for them, you know, and looking for win-win for long-term successes is the key. In marketing, it really has to do about creating long-term value. And in ethics, there are always business ethics and marketing ethics that need to be considered. What about in advertising? You know, how can your company make sure that they are using advertising where they're seen as being an ethical company? I mean, doing the right thing for potential stakeholders really is a good way of looking at ethics. There is an American Marketing Association Code of Ethics, and it's a generally accepted code of ethics for marketing. It flows from general norms of conduct to specific values, and there are sub areas within marketing that have their own code of ethics to deal with specific issues. Personal ethics always will come into play. You know, business is all about people, the people running it and the people that are the consumers of the products or services. And so where do our ethics come from? Well, some of our ethics comes from genetics, comes from our family, religious background, and values. So there's a lot of different areas. Why do people act unethically is a good question to consider. You know, what makes people take actions that create so much harm? Are all individuals who engage in questionable behavior just plain immoral or unethical or just bad decision makers? And then decisions often have conflicting outcomes where both options have a positive and a negative outcome. So we really have got to be thinking through our choices before we make decisions. There is something called a dangerous flaw in competing models, and you have to take a look at, making decisions, whether it be delaying a production or continuing a production. If you delay a production of your product or service, the revenue could be delayed, people could get laid off, there could be a loss of bonuses. But if you continue with production, people could potentially get injured, or there could be a loss of revenue as a long-term effect of making the bad decision. So there is let's shift to corporate responsibility. There is a link between ethics and corporate responsibility, and so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Companies can be socially responsible or socially irresponsible, and they could be neither. And so that's kind of a propelling question in making decisions, So you have to use an ethical framework for decision making. One, you got to identify the issues, and sometimes it's best to sit down with the leadership team and when you're making decisions, because you don't always know what you don't know. Step 2 is gather information and identify stakeholders. Step 3 is to brainstorm and evaluate your alternatives, and step 4 is to choose a course of action. Everything is related to your choices and your decisions. It's not what happens to you, but it's what you choose to do that matters most. So when you're identifying the issues, you need to be able to identify whether or not you're misleading or harming the public. You need to do marketing research to make sure that you're firming up the issues. You need to make sure that you're collecting enough data and you're helping people really understand what they're in. So in order to gather information and identify stakeholders, you have to identify all ethical issues that are relevant, legal of nature. And you identify all relevant stakeholders and get their input on any identifiable ethical issues. The brainstorming stage is really important, and you got to really take a look at what your alternatives are. Should you halt the project? Should you make some responses and be anonymous? And should you make sure that you are applying the AMA code of ethics for all researchers? Choosing your course of action really is about weighing the alternatives and taking your course of actions. There's always different phases in any strategy that you're creating, and so you integrate ethics into your marketing strategy by planning, then implementing, and then controlling. So each of those stages are important. In the planning phase, the mission or vision statement sets the tone for the overall ethical tone for planning, and then mission statements can be used as a means to guide a firm's SWOT analysis, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, as you recall. Newman's Own Dressing. They can use their donations to their charitable causes as part of their advertising, and they've donated over $200 million since 1982, and that just makes them look good, and it's a good product that people can feel good about purchasing. So in the implementation phase, you have to ask yourself 3 questions. 1, should the firm be targeting this market with this product? 2, should the firm be relocating production to another country? Or 3, should the firm be selling its product in this market and in this manner? So that's an example of the implementation phase. And then in the control phase, that's when you check for successful implementation and then make the corrections and right reactions to your decisions. Corporate responsibility really involves a host of activities. It involves how you treat employees, the marketplace, sustainability, customers, and society as a whole. So These are things that large companies have done to really help build their reputation of excellence. One of my favorite companies is Amazon.com, and they developed a nonprofit simple pay donation system to help nonprofits raise money easily. BMW uses Light Up Hope and BMW's children's safety programs. Coca-Cola spent $102 million through the Coca-Cola campaign focusing on water stewardship, healthy and active lifestyles, community recycling, and education. FedEx transported more than 67 planes worth of aid to disaster victims. .org funds for nonprofit entrepreneurship in Africa, Google China, Social Innovation Cup, and for college students. And so we can go on and find examples of how companies use corporate responsibility. You may ask, what is corporate responsibility? And it's the voluntary actions that are taken by a company to address ethical, social, and environmental impacts of its business operations and concerns of its stakeholders. Let's face it, it just looks good for a company to be a corporate, social, responsible company. How can you implement that into your marketing plan, I guess, is the big question. Are you being ethical in each of the decisions that you make as you market your product? So just a quick video on ethics in marketing. I hope you've taken something away from this, and I hope that you have a great day, because only you get to choose how you feel about it. I'm Dr. Paul.